The following program is made possible by supporters and friends of Biblical Foundations Academy International.
Previously on Time Will Tell.
Everything that evolves inside the Jewish world evolves around the Torah, evolves around this calendar which establishes the Moadim, the appointed times. So we have a calendar which is based on the cycle of the universe.
This is an amazing place. The oldest mosaic found in Israel. They combined in the floor of the synagogue the sun god Helios with the zodiac right next to the images from the very temple that we've been talking about this entire project.
This is the first year where I've actually celebrated with my Jewish brothers and sisters. Every single group celebrated the event at the same time. They looked up in the sky, they determined what the time was, just like they did in the book of Esther, and they had a party. And I've been partying with them based on the understanding of God's clock. After spending extensive time and effort trying to understand the Muslim, Christian, and Jewish perspectives on time, I was ready to get back to my Bible to see whose clock was truly synced with God's clock in the heavens and his calendar that is hardwired into the earth. The biblical clock and calendar is centered on the Passover celebration taking place in the first month of the biblical year, or in God's clock terms, the new moon of the Aviv, which is an agricultural term. Deuteronomy 16:1. Observe the month of Aviv and celebrate the Passover to the Lord your God, for in the month of Aviv, the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt by night. These two Hebrew terms, Chodesh and Aviv, are equivalent to the clock striking midnight on the first day of January. But the question is, who lives by this biblical way of keeping time? Then I remembered something Rabbi Jackson said that made a lot of sense, and to be honest, it sent chills up my spine. He was preaching about the fact that the rabbinic calendar, or as he likes to say, the fixed calendar, was a temporary necessity because the Jewish people were scattered throughout the world. But he wanted to make sure I got the message that things had changed.
Get it? We're here. What does this mean? The fact that we are here means, I feel, that the redemption is at hand. God has gathered us from the four corners of the world as God prophesied in Deuteronomy, that when we have scattered to the worlds, we will be returned to our land. Got it?
After he calmed down, I asked if I could find someone who could teach me how to read this biblical calendar and help me learn to tell time based on God's clock. I became a man on a new mission. I wanted to learn how to know what time it was in order to know when to meet with God on his schedule. I just needed to find a teacher. This time, a museum just wouldn't do. First stop, Dr. Roy Hoffman, professor at Hebrew University and creator of a computer program that tracks the sighting of God's clock.
Well, this program that I created was in order to help people work out whether the moon was visible or not. In the first instance, it wasn't very certain exactly when the moon would appear because, although we know the exact position of the moon from modern astronomy, we do not know how the brightness and the contrast with the background sky brightness allows you to see the moon or not, and that was a parameter that's quite uncertain. So by collecting thousands of observations, we've now been able to hone that down to a fairly precise science.
I have to admit, when he offered to show me the actual computer program, I was a bit intimidated. I just wanted to know if I could learn to sight God's clock and if I would be able to see it on Friday, the 23rd of March.
What I've put here is visibility by criterion, but let's look at the moon and look for when the next new moon will appear, and it turns out to be on Friday the 23rd of March.
Just when I thought I was ready to sight the moon, he starts with leap years, Aviv Barley, and the Sanhedrin. I'm going to stick with the one term that I know is biblical, Aviv.
In the current calendar that we use. The calculated calendar, we add 1 month 7 times every 19 years. In the past, when there was a Sanhedrin, and we expect that in the future there will be a recognized Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin itself would decide, based on how things are progressing, whether to add a month each year. And the first criterion they would use is that the barley offering, you see the barley here, should be given brought after the 16th of Nisan, which should be after the equinox. If the 16th of Nisan looks like it's going to be before the equinox, then they have to delay it by a month. However, having said that, also the barley has to be ready by the 16th of Nisan, and by looking at how the barley is progressing during Adar, we can know within a couple of days when the barley will be ready, and therefore know whether to add another month.
Can I confess that after all of that info, I was a bit confused? I asked Dr. Hoffman to show me some of this important Aviv barley. It just so happens that there was some outside his office. However, I have to admit, it was still over my Methodist head. I knew what I had to do if I really wanted to understand this important issue. I had to go out and look at some barley fields with my own 2 eyes.
Hey guys, Dr. Hoffman said that I was supposed to be able to look for the barley, whether it's Aviv. The problem is I don't know if I'm in a barley field or a wheat field. Now, the Bible says that he put 2 great lights in the sky to help us to understand the signs, the seasons, the days, and the years. You already learned about the Moedim. The problem is, I know about the Moedim, I know about the moon, I know about the sun now, but I don't understand about the Aviv. I've got to find somebody who could help me understand whether I'm looking at wheat or whether I'm looking at barley. I know who I could ask.
I have to confess that I had heard from Rabbi Jackson that there was a little controversy. Okay, maybe more than a little controversy, surrounding a group of Jews called Karaites who were in the land of Israel living by the biblical calendar and looking for the Aviv barley before the first new moon of each year.
Now we have a new group of people called the Karaites. And the Karaites become very, very important and popular and want to move back to the land around the 10th century of the Common Era. And therein breaks out one of the biggest debates of all time.
I guess I should also mention that the guy I wanted to ask for help from happens to be a Karaite Jew named Nehemiah Gordon, who conducts an Aviv search each spring. I just wasn't sure that he would be willing to let a meddling Methodist like me search with him. This is the Jerusalem campus of the Hebrew University, where an actual ivory tower soars on the top of what is called Mount Scopus. The view from this mountain has scenic and historic significance regarding God's clock, as I would soon find out. But first, I needed to find my new Aviv barley guide.
Hey, the guy that I'm looking for hangs out here at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I heard he hangs out in the library. Let's see if we can find him and get ourselves some information.
It was a bit uncomfortable walking around with a video camera in a library. It was even more awkward after finding Nehemiah Gordon at the Hebrew University, and he just ignored me. I decided to simply follow him around and insist on an answer to my request. He seemed perfectly comfortable keeping me in limbo while I kept the camera rolling. At least he didn't call security and get me kicked out. He agreed to let me listen to his lecture on the subject of the biblical versus the Jewish calendar, but I'd already been down that road with Dr. Hoffman and Dr. Jackson. Besides, the guy talked for what seemed like hours. I needed an invitation to get beyond the walls of a classroom and join him on the actual adventure to experience looking for the Aviv barley. It took some more following with the camera and major negotiations to get this guy to allow me to join him on the Aviv search, but in the end he agreed. Our first stop, however, made me think the person who came up with the saying, "Be careful what you ask for because you just might get it," must have been a prophet. Nehemiah only had 2 conditions for me joining him on the Aviv search, and that was that I had to have my own car and agree to follow him without asking questions about where he would lead me. That seemed easy enough to me. My friend Yoel Halevi joined the search along with several others, so I actually enjoyed the trip down to southwest Israel. As we stopped for a short break, I noticed this sign that looked suspicious to me. I asked Yoel, who joined the search with us, to read it for me. That was a mistake. I would soon understand the reason for Nehemiah's conditions.
So in case of a siren You have to run into the protective area inside the gas station, because we're basically in the area where Qassam missiles from Gaza actually fall.
Well, after a great effort, I finally got a hold of this man. Everyone knows about him, Nehemiah Gordon, and he agreed to take me on his Aviv search. The problem is where we're starting. Nehemiah, would you tell everybody where we are?
Well, right behind me here is Gaza City. We're on the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip, where and the Gaza Strip is currently controlled by the Hamas terrorist organization, which is constantly lobbing missiles and rockets at Israeli civilians.
Okay, hold on.
And we're actually standing here in a concrete reinforced bunker because you can't just stand here out in the open. It's not safe.
So folks want to know this. Why is it so important to make such a big deal about coming down here to look for the Aviv? Why couldn't we just stay in Jerusalem, in the old city, and look for some Aviv? Why are we down here?
Well, so Leviticus 23 talks about the Feast of Unleavened Bread coinciding with the beginning of the barley harvest. And if you want to find the earliest barley, you've got to find where those places are in the land of Israel where it ripens first. Well, we know from experience and from historical sources that this is it right here. So we've got to come down here, rockets or not.
Just when I hoped Nehemiah was being overly dramatic, some military vehicles passed by us on their way to Gaza City. After expressing my concerns, Nehemiah led me through a thorn patch to get a closer look at Gaza. It seemed to motivate Nehemiah to get me closer to the Gaza border the more I expressed my hesitation. Okay, fears.
So look over here, you can see Gaza City in the background. And then you see that smokestack over there. That is at the southern end of Ashkelon, which is a Jewish town. And you can see how close it is. And the people in Gaza have been firing rockets for 8 years trying to hit the Israeli power plant. They're very inaccurate rockets, so they haven't been successful yet.
Just when I was about to complain about what was shaping up to be a military tour, we got out of the cars and started the Aviv search 200 yards from the Gaza border. That's when I decided to just relax and enjoy the next 2 days searching to see if the barley was Aviv, no matter where Nehemiah led me. Just as I was starting to settle down, Nehemiah seemed to be speeding up. After he changed out of his famous Crocs to his walking boots, it was as if he became the Energizer Bunny. He just kept going and going and going, and he expected full participation. So I followed Nehemiah everywhere he went, both on foot and by car, along the palm tree-lined highways and the lemon tree-lined byways. Sometimes he would stop along the side of the road at a moment's notice to see if there was ripened barley.
So this is not barley. As you drive by on the road, you can confuse it with barley. But when you come up close, you see it's actually tares. It soaks up the water but doesn't produce any seed.
Everyone took turns playing the who can keep up with Nehemiah game. Even though the fields all still looked the same to me, I just kept following and learning.
Here we have a stalk of barley that's in the Aviv stage. It's the seeds are already firm. When you squeeze on it, nothing comes out. That means most of the moisture is gone. And when you parch this in fire, it gets hard. And in Leviticus, it talks about Aviv parched in fire, which they would then offer as a sacrifice. And the reason they're parching in fire is it's not fully ripe. It's not fully hard yet. It's firm, but not hard, where you could grind it into flour. So this is the Aviv parched in fire. In 2 weeks during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, this will be fully ripe, and you'll be able to cut an omer, a sheaf, to bring as an offering in the temple. And that then begins the 50-day countdown towards the Feast of Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks.
When I heard Nehemiah say the barley was Aviv, everyone lightened up, and in this intense region of Israel, even ate some of the barley to see what it tasted like. My Levite friend Yoel started practicing waving the sheaf as they did in ancient times. Even Nehemiah got caught up and did his best impression of blowing the shofar. Give the guy credit for trying. When I heard Aviv, I just did an old-fashioned dance.
Look, he found the Aviv! He found the Aviv!
As we traveled back from the south, my excitement was tempered as I looked at the bus stops that doubled as bomb shelters, and especially when I saw a bomb shelter on a children's playground. It was a sweet and sour adventure to the south, but the journey was only beginning. The next day we needed to travel to the north to see if we could find a second witness. The next day we were traveling within 2 hours north of Jerusalem as the crow flies. As we made our way toward the Judean desert, I was much more aware of what to look for, though I must admit, as I followed Nehemiah's car down into the valley, the Judean hills had all of my attention. Have I used the word breathtaking yet? Because this scenery literally took my breath away, which wasn't good since I needed it to keep up with Nehemiah on a hike down into this rugged valley where the purple flowers were blooming all over the hills, and the natural spring was at a rare overflow stage. This seemed like a perfect place to slow down and ask Nehemiah to talk so that I could sit down and take a rest.
And it's really interesting because Jeremiah mentions this very same river valley. There's a prophecy where God says to him, he says, take a garment and bring it and put it in a cave in Nahal Prat, which is this valley. And it's really interesting because Jeremiah came from Anatot, which is a village that's a few miles in that direction. So he was intimately familiar with this river valley. And when he talks about the source of living water, that may be this very spring, or one of the other two springs in this valley.
Even though I was tired, I was also inspired to keep following Professor Gordon just in case he opened up a lecture along the way.
And do you know the Hebrew word for barley, anyone? Seorim or seorah in the singular, and seorah comes from the Hebrew word se'ar, which, well, neither of us have any to demonstrate, but se'ar is hair. And the reason it's called that is it has these hairs coming out. They're called awns in English, but in Hebrew, you see they're much longer than with wheat, and that's called why it gets the name seorah.
I was surprised at the lengths I would go to combine rest with learning, all under the guise of a good gamma shot. As the group left me lying in the field, I decided to try something different. I looked at things from the ground level. This view inspired me to pick the water as my guide for this place to see where it would lead me. It was like it had a voice that was calming and yet intentional. It is really cool to follow nature sometimes. The water led me to the flowers that led me to this guy, who gave me a really good idea. I found this cave where my body became the voice, and it said it was time for a good old-fashioned afternoon cat nap. My friend Yoel missed the signs about naps, so he just covered up and buckled up for the journey to the next stop. As we followed Nehemiah out of the mountains, we headed toward the plains of the Jordan River where the trees have been well watered because of the winter rains, and the spring flowers were in full bloom right next to the border of the Kingdom of Jordan.
So we're here in the Jordan Valley and we're looking at the barley to see if it's aviv yet. And we're actually about, I'd say halfway up the Jordan Valley near a place called Marja Naja in the so-called West Bank. This is actually the liberated areas of Samaria.
Tell me about the fence right there.
This is the border fence between Israel and the Kingdom of Jordan. Beyond that border fence is the no man's land, which is covered with landmines, and then beyond that is the Jordan River, which is the actual international border between Israel and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Over there on the other side is the lands of Transjordan, which were given to the 2.5 tribes of Israel that decided to stay on the other side of the Jordan. And one of the things you need to be concerned about is where you step, because there could be landmines. They're only supposed to be on the other side of the fence, but it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes landmines tend to migrate. What will happen is there are flash floods that wash into this area, and they can move them sometimes by miles. So when you're in an area like this, you need to be very careful. Look where you step, and if you hear a clicking, don't move.
Can I say it was hard for me to buy Nehemiah's whole "this is dangerous" shtick when he was sitting and counting barley wearing his Hollywood sunglasses? That was until this happened.
Take them from the middle, and squeeze it. גם ללמוד?
שלום.
שלום.
מה נשמע?
בסדר.
אתם תיירים?
אני לא תייר.
חלק כן, חלק לא.
חלק כן.
מה אתם עושים פה?
הנה,
מסתכלים על הסערה. כן.
עוד מעט פסח, כן?
כן.
רק בקשה קטנה תתקרבו לפני שלכם.
ברור, ברור.
לא התקרב.
תודה רבה.
תודה רבה.
כל ציוב,
אתם
שבת
יודעים שיש
שלום.
פעם צעדה.
לא.
איזה צעדה בעיקר?
מה זה?
מתחיל מפלס נחל עד לברוש הבקעה.
ומי צועד?
מי שבא.
לא,
יהודים
מה-
או שזה משהו פוליטי?
שבוע הבא, המצעד הבעייתי.
This was crazy. I was just playing around in fields where there are landmines. I decided to get back in the car.
Can you explain to us what just happened?
Okay, so I actually know this area because I served in this area. This was our area that we patrolled. That road was the road we used all the time. Basically, the issue is that this is a border, as Nehemiah pointed out. And the protocol is the moment you see a cluster of people next to the border, you have to check what's going on. Why are they here? Because we have also leftist organizations that try to break the border and try to run into these places. The main issue is that there's landmines, basically. It's very, very dangerous. So they want to make sure people don't walk into there, because we've had people in the Golden Heights, for example, walk into landmines.
We only had one field to check before making the determination on whether the barley was Aviv, and I was getting tired again. Or maybe it was concern. But either way, I kept going.
Here we are, you all. We've gone north, south, east, and west. I've been talking about it all the time. We just passed the checkpoint from the West Bank, quote unquote, back into Israel to an amazing field. We're going to see if we can get some more information about this. Let's go.
I kept following Nehemiah through fields that may or may not have landmines. It seemed like nothing could slow him down. I should say almost nothing.
There's barbed wire here.
He actually went through all of this just for me to see the wild donkeys in the field as a picture of our journey the last 2 days. I'm still not sure what he meant by that.
I found him. Nehemiah, tell us, where are we at right now? What's the difference between this field and that field? Let the people know.
Well, we're here in the Jordan Valley, and just south of Beit Shan, and we're here at a wheat field. But we're really not interested in the wheat. What we want to find is the first ripening grains of the barley, to find the Aviv barley. And over here, right next to the wheat field, we have barley growing. And what we found is that some of this barley, this particular one is not Aviv, but over here in this section of the field, we're finding that it is Aviv. And in fact, we did a sampling. We found 100% of that sampling was Aviv barley. And this is actually the fourth field that we found today that has this Aviv barley. Definitely enough that in 2 weeks' time, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we could have when what Deuteronomy 16 calls when the sickle begins upon the standing grain. And so we definitely have enough here where we could harvest it, take it in the arm and harvest it, and we have a sheaf that you could then bring before the priest. That is the wave sheaf that begins the 50-day count to Shavuot. What that means is the next new moon that we sight tonight is going to be the new moon of the Aviv.
Wait, hold on now, Nehemiah, wait. Now, just tell them real quick, what have we done the last 2 days? Real quick, where have we gone the last 2 days?
We've been traveling around Israel, all over the country, but particularly in the places that we know the barley is going to ripen earliest, specifically the northwestern Negev. The Negev is a desert, but the northwestern part of the Negev has huge amounts of agriculture going on there, and the barley is perfect conditions for barley, and it ripens there. One of the earliest places it ripens. The other is the central part of the Jordan Valley, really south of the Beit Shan Valley, which is also a very fertile place for the barley to grow. And we've gone all over these places, and we found actually two witnesses in each of these locations, 2 fields in each of the locations, which are Aviv barley. And together there's clear evidence, no question whatsoever, that the next new moon is going to be the new moon
hold on.
of the Aviv.
The Aviv, I got the Aviv, I understand the Aviv, so I'm ready to proclaim the new year right now. I don't want to do anything else. Am I ready?
No, we got to cite the new moon.
What do you mean we got to cite the new moon? I found the
No, so Deuteronomy 16, verse 1 says, Shamor et Chodesh Aviv, observe the Chodesh of the Aviv. Chodesh is translated month, but it literally means new moon. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to observe the new moon of the Aviv.
Well, here I am in an actual barley field where the barley is Aviv according to the understanding of when the beginning of the year starts. I'm going to tell you something. The ancient Israelites would have understood it. I'm telling you guys, this is so simple, even a Methodist can understand when the barley is Aviv. And I've got some right here. Now we simply need to find God's clock in the sky. We'll have a witness in heaven and on earth, and we can have ourselves a good old-fashioned Happy New Year.
I could hardly wait to get back to Jerusalem, and for good reason. When I arrived, I could feel electricity in the air as people were preparing for both the Sabbath and the beginning of the biblical New Year. I heard that Muslims were also preparing to sight the new moon on the very same day. I decided that the best place for me to sight the moon was from the Mount of Olives next to an Arab village overlooking God's clock headquarters so that I could witness this special day from both the Jewish and the Muslim perspective. While some Jews were dancing in the courtyards of their synagogues, some Muslims were honking their horns and shooting off fireworks in their villages. I wondered if there were many Christians searching for God's clock on this special day.
It's got to be coming pretty soon, you all. We're going to find it. We're rediscovering his clock.
As I watched the sunset, my mind took me all the way back to the beginning of this journey. I thought about Methodist sacred time, the Easter holiday calculation, the vernal equinox, and the zodiac on the floors of churches and synagogues. I reflected on Roman sun worship and the Catholic Church's way of mixing the two. I thought about the Muslim moon and their clocks on the walls of mosques. I wondered about why the Jews acknowledged the moon as the biblical clock but followed the rabbinic calendar. But mostly I thought about being in Jerusalem, waiting to see God's clock in the heavens at the time of the beginning of the biblical year.
Folks, you might not be able to see it, but we see it here. The new moon is here, God's clock. There it is.
Join me in the Time Will Tell series finale when tomb time intersects with biblical time. Walk with me to the two traditional spots of the burial and resurrection of Jesus and crawl with me out of an authentic first century tomb. Listen to different solutions on how to make 3 days and 3 nights fit into Friday night to Sunday morning. Finally, hear what the Bible says on how biblical time is always right on time, even inside a tomb. This is only a sample of the many people, places, and things I encountered on the Time Will Tell series.
Please remember, Biblical Foundations Academy International depends on tax-deductible donations from viewers like you.